And again, it's not required, but the extent to which people can turn on their videos, that'll be great. Just because otherwise, I end up looking at a blank screen, and that can um, be a bit odd. I've got used to it. It feels like I'm doing a radio broadcast or something like that. Anyway, okay, so welcome. We've started recording. This is lecture 2 of HUL256, Critical Thinking. If you haven't already done so, please sign on for the course Piazza page. The credentials are available in this Teams. I should give you a heads up that we'll be shifting to another Teams, which is the HUL256 Teams rather than HSL256 Teams from next week. One of the big administrative things that I have to do is allocate tutorials, tutorial slots. So I'll send out an email, I think, by end of day tomorrow, and you can give me your preferences. I don't have strong feelings of you rotating, coming in and out of different tutorials. There's something to be said for continuity because you build a sense of community with the people you're seeing in the same tutorial. So that's the only reason why it makes sense to stick with an assigned time. If for whatever reason you can't make it that day, or you want to switch permanently, go ahead. You don't have to you don't have to inform me. As you know, tutorials there's no attendance requirement, there's no recording, but the issues and the readings that I'll assign for tutorials are part of the course content that you will be examined for, and essentially it'll be maybe a more discussion based orientation than the lecture, which I found in the past that I think people quite like a clear lecture followed by Q&A rather than a very interactive kind of space, because particularly someone like me can get distracted, or the course content can can go in different directions. I tend to be somebody who likes moving around, but maybe doesn't make for the best learning. So my plan for today is just to say a little bit more about what the course is about. How many people are here today who were not here on Monday?
So on Monday, I did join a bit late, so I missed first 10 minutes of the class.
Okay. You can just raise your hand. This so I have a sense of how many people there are, but it sounds like most people are already clued into what is happening. So I won't repeat that material very much. But before I jump into the material for today, which I will start sharing the screen for, primarily the reading by Elliot Cohen on free thinking. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to put it to this page. Any questions on the administrative side of things in terms of what was discussed in class on Monday? Clarifications about grading policies or assignments, that sort of thing. Okay, so in general, if you have questions that are useful, or you think whose answers will be relevant to many people, whether it's about the more administrative parts of the class, or whether it's about the academic content of the class, if it's going to be valuable for a whole bunch of people, then it's probably best to post it on Piazza. And otherwise, feel free to email me. I tend to email back, if not the same day, then the very next day. So I'm quite, typically don't have to send me follow-ups. Don't use Teams. I don't use Teams very much, so I'd don't send me a message on Teams. Send me an email. That would be my preference. Okay, since there are no more no administrative questions, let me start with what I wanted today. And what I want to say today is say more about, well, what the course is about, and also introduce two ways in which one might think about critical thinking and why it might be valuable. And those two ways correspond to the two texts I had assigned for today. And this text by Elliot Cohen. I'll put the, I don't have the front page, but it's it's from a book called Free Thinking, and you can see some of these terms on the left-hand side table of contents might be um, unfamiliar to you, but we'll come across some of them. So what I want to offer to you right now is at least two reasons why we might be interested in a critical thinking course, and one perspective, the perspective that I'll associate with Cohen. I'll call it a freedom perspective, whereas the other perspective, which I associate with the work of that short piece by Kenneth Boyd, I will call, I don't know if you can see this, the Boyd piece,
Yes,
the
sir.
antidote, yeah. So I'll call the well-being perspective. There might be other perspectives to motivate the search for critical thinking, and I'd be curious, maybe by the end of the course you could generate some yourself, but these are two that I find helpful. And if I have time at the end of class today, and you should remind me if I don't, I want to mention sort of one kind of very important limitation of a course like this. So one shouldn't, I think it's important to see that there are many things that if you cared about critical thinking, let's say whether from a freedom perspective or a well-being perspective, what the course can get you is only a limited part of what might be actually needed. That'll become clear. One important caveat in this course, at least, especially because it's a critical thinking course, is I invite you to be to be a critical thinker with respect to the material we teach here, or that we look at here. So just because I've assigned a piece of reading to you doesn't mean that you have to accept it. You might disagree with what is being said, and frankly, the more you disagree, the better. Maybe, yeah, that's what exercising your mind will involve. Okay, so let me turn then to the Elliot Cohen reading on this is the preface and introduction to this book called Free Thinking, and he says on, I guess this is page 3 of or page 4, he says, free thinking is thus critical thinking unleashed from social, political, cultural, and religious bondage. So you can see that there's a contrast between the free and free thinking and various different kinds of bondage. What do you think he might have in mind when he speaks of social? Can you give me an example of each of these kinds of bondage? What would be an example of social bondage?
It may be about our perspective about black people or racism.
So can you say more about that? What do you mean? What do you have
I
in
mean
mind?
that people generally have negativity about black people, and free thinkers don't accept that.
So
They,
maybe certain kinds of default
they kind
prejudices,
of
maybe certain kinds of social prejudices
Yeah.
would count
That,
as cases of bondage.
mm-hmm.
Okay, what about political? What is a case of political bondage?
So having some kind of bias towards a particular political ideology.
Yeah,
And
of course. BJP and Congress, all this.
Why should that be a form of bondage? Just liking something or deciding one thing is better than the other. Why is that
Like,
bondage?
sir, like, let's take the case of what Rahul Gandhi is like. In a general way, the public has turned him into a joke. But the thing, the bondage has come to the point that even if he says something, like in an instance where he says something which is a bit logical or which actually has some reason, even
Mhm.
then people are just going to shove it off aside just because he is the pappu of the country.
So that sounds like your thought is again it's bondage because it's a kind of unthinking default. Is that your idea?
Yes, sir, because he has been just fixed into that narrative that whatever he says, he's just going to say it's not going to have any like sense or anything. So
Okay.
his prestige, etc., it's just reduced because of the general image.
Good. I can think of that as an example of and it's in the same kind of way, it sounds like it's an unthinking default in the way that maybe social prejudice is um, an unthinking default. Um, does Cohen himself think of political bondage in that way?
So I think
What is his example?
I think he mainly talks about the way sort of political parties and like the politicians influence media to sort of push propaganda or to onto the people. I think that's what he mainly talks about.
So he says um, on the first page of the book, I think this is what he has in mind in uh, uh, political bondage. Maybe somebody can read this out in an open society, this passage.
Political leaders are not to be idolized and worshipped as gods among humans. Like anyone else, their views can be called into question if they fail to fit the facts as rationally determined. Such a society is anti-authoritarian, realistic, and democratic in its emphasis on enlightened self-governance. In contrast, a closed society is authoritarian and its leaders led by demanding blind obedience. Here there is typically an appeal to the supernatural instead of reason and a tendency to make the facts fit the political policy rather than vice versa.
Okay, thanks. So I think that's really the kind of example he has of political bondage when you're, um, so much in maybe you worship or idolize political leaders in a way that doesn't allow you to question them. The thought of questioning them doesn't arise. We'll see in the tutorial next week a famous speech from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly, where he makes the same kind of point. He says, "Bhakti in religion is a good thing, but bhakti in politics is a bad thing." Um, so it's a nice and very famous speech that um, I'd like you to read. Shambhav, I'll just come back to you in a second. Um, so let's go back to these different kinds of bondage. So we saw social, political. What about cultural and religious bondage? What are examples of?
Our views about Muslims and all those, because we generally people connect Muslims with terrorists basically.
So that's another example of prejudice, right? But isn't that more like social?
I
I
think
mean,
that
is there a difference between social and cultural bondage?
so it basically Islam people don't have many a positive view about Islam as well. So it's we can call it a religious bondage because
I see. You think of that as religious bondage.
yeah.
I was coming to the. So we'll talk. By the way, one of the things that well, maybe this is as good a time to talk about it as any other. But in fact, starting from next week, we will talk in some detail about prejudice in the context of. I think I already mentioned this Nazi Germany, and one reason to introduce the case of Nazi Germany is that I think for many people in the aftermath of the Second World War had this thought of, look, how could we I think I mentioned this last time, but how could this highly cultured civilization descend to the kind of level of barbarity that was shown towards Jews and other groups of people as well? And then there was this kind of task to provide kind of protective tools against propaganda of a kind that might turn people against a particular community. Some have argued that you find similar sorts of demonization in India happening today in connection with minority communities, particularly Muslims. So we may look, if we have time, at some data on those kinds of attitudes. But just to say that this is the kind of thing he has in mind. We'll talk a little bit about. So for Hemant's, religious bondage was also sort of prejudice along the lines of religious, on religious lines. Can you think of other forms of religious bondage?
Sir, is it possible, like religious, for religious bondage, such as our emotions or something attached with things, like for Hindus, it's like worshipping cows.
Okay, so
Like,
why would that be bondage?
Because we kind of like put cows above all other animals, and there is kind of like partiality and something like that.
Again, one way in which it might be bondage, and I would invite you to go back and read the Cohen piece and think about the extent to which these are the instances of bondage, is that if it's an unthinking default way of approaching the world that isn't is resistant to discussion, counterexample, evidence on the other side, there's some sense that you're then you're tied, you're in bondage, and the way out lies in being more self-critical, open to evidence, and so on. So the way out, and again we'll see in the next few weeks various articulations of this idea, but in this Western philosophical tradition that Cohen is coming from, there's a very strong kind of equation of freedom with rationality or with thought. The highest levels of freedom arise when you're completely rational. That's a very broad idea that's associated with philosophers, for instance, like Plato, also philosophers such as Immanuel Kant, whom we read. Plato's most famous student, Plato's teacher Socrates is sometimes seen as an example of a man who's free because he isn't dogmatic. A kind of paradigm example in this Western philosophical tradition. So there's an equation of freedom with thinking, and therefore free thinking, critical thinking, as some form of liberation. If you think about it, I don't know, different cultures might approach the question of liberation in different ways. So in maybe the Indian traditions where liberation is equated with non-attachment, right, asceticism of certain forms. But in this tradition, the issue is liberation is approached through the realm of rationality, and a course like this is supposed to, in this tradition, equip you with some of the tools to liberate yourself. Cohen, in fact, makes a longer case here. and he quotes a philosopher whom we will see again in the course, the philosopher Karl Popper, for Cohen, the critical powers. In fact, maybe somebody read this highlighted portion?
The critical powers unleashed in an open society engage the rational capacity of human beings to reach conclusions on the basis of evidence and to revise these conclusions as the evidence changes. This openness to evidence distinguishes it from closed societies which submit to ritualistic, superstitious, and blind thinking impervious to evidence.
Okay, thanks. So this notion, um, the openness to evidence and the openness to change one's mind if one is provided with new evidence, that's taken as a maybe a characteristic trait or disposition of the free thinker. I'm going to use the term free thinking and critical thinking as roughly synonymous. So this orientation towards the world involves a exercising the rational capacity of human beings. Now this is a trait of individuals, right? Openness to evidence. But as he goes on to point out, corresponding to that trait of individuals is a kind of political or cultural a property of societies or nations, right? So he says critical thinking would be welcome in an open society and shunned in a closed one. It is the lifeline of a free nation, a nation whose citizens shape their own destinies through rational self-determination instead of drone-like obedience. So this is another way in which the concept of critical thinking connects with the concept of freedom. So we saw in one case it's the individual who's liberated by being able to question their default assumptions. You might say societies are also free to the extent that they allow individuals to have this kind of freedom. So another kind of impetus, or another kind of arena where the question of critical thinking comes up a lot, including for our own context, is in the context of democracy and democratic values. And we'll see that in some of the readings that we look at. So one of the things we'll discuss is of the work of Noam Chomsky. I don't know if that's a familiar name to many of you. These names down people who have made this kind of connection with critical thinking and democratic values. I would add to that Dr. Ambedkar actually. So yeah, so let me not say more about this kind of perspective on freedom, or maybe I'll make two final points. For somebody like Cohen, one of the reasons why critical thinking is a path to freedom is because it has a kind of protective aspect, right? So if you look at the preface, the pictures of an essentially kind of hostile world. You know, their political leaders are out to manipulate you for their own political gains. There's the mass media, which in many ways serves corporate interests. People are trying to sell you stuff you don't need. And in order to protect yourself from those things, because, you know, Otherwise, you'll be brainwashed and you'll be unfree. You need these tools. So he frames this in a kind of protective frame. One thing that I would hope that you would leave this course with, in addition to the tools and the abilities to use them in a protective kind of way, is also actually make yourself a bit more self-critical. These tools are not only to be used against other people trying to make your life more difficult, but both the tools and this orientation, the openness to evidence, I hope would maybe shake your own confidence in some of your judgments, or at least see that some of the things that we may take for granted as being obviously right may be more complicated than we initially think. So that's one of the outcomes of the course that I wish for you. Let me say just one more thing, since I've mentioned these names: Chomsky, Havel, Ambedkar. One of the things I want to do for you in the course is to just come up with examples of exemplars or people who have embodied some of these values in their own lives in different domains, whether it's the social, political, scientific domains. I at least, I think, find it useful in terms of forms of inspiration, perhaps. And I think sometimes you might find the examples curious or counterintuitive, but it'd be fun to think through how you react to them. Let me pause there. Any questions on anything I've just said? How many of you would think of yourselves as free in the sense that Cohen wants you to be? How many I don't know, how many of you would characterize yourselves as free thinkers or generally skeptical? Nope, nobody. That's surprising to me. I would think that IIT students who take my classes tend to be actually quite independent-minded. They don't follow the herd. Is that true of yourselves, or is it true of the people you hang out with? So we have 3 people. We have, now I've forgotten, is it Aryan or Amit? What should I call you?
Aryan, sir.
Okay, so we'll go with Aryan, Ratnesh, Arin, and Unnati, and then move on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? Like, you want me to talk about if other people follow the herd mentality? Is that it?
To what extent do you see yourself as being an independent thinker? And to what extent do you think the people around you are independent thinkers, independent critical thinkers?
So I can't classify myself as like completely independent, because I do find myself following the herd in certain areas, right? Like, I mean, for example, the decision to take IIT was like, at least initially, mainly because of seeing other people being like, "Ha, IIT acha hai." So it was sort of following the herd, but then at the same time, the way Cohen describes it um, as staying away from biases and then sort of trying to question everything, at least that I feel I do perform in some respect, right? So which is why I feel that I am sort of free thinking in that respect.
And what about people around you?
People around me, like in IIT at least, I think quite a few people do have are free thinkers, and then an equal number, like they question everything like academically, right? Like the point I'm talking about is mainly in the form of academics, and like there are some people who question everything in from related to the future as well, right? And in terms of academics, I feel IIT has a lot of free thinkers, and then in terms of say their own future, like whether or not you should go for a job or higher studies, etc. I think in that respect, the number of free thinkers is still less in IIT, but then I think it is still higher than say compared to elsewhere, like but I can't really say about that, but
Okay, so one thing you pointed out is one can be free thinking maybe in one domain but not another domain. Ratnesh, yeah? No, go ahead, Aryan.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with what you said, yeah.
Okay. Ratnesh.
Yes, sir. So my point is that like you may be saying like even professors in IIT are there here who will make rules like even in courses. They will say that like just a second. Like there are professors in even in IIT who said that like in online classes, like half of people are cheating. Then why half of their who are here they should not do online examinations? Why are being invited in offline classes? So I will take online. I will take online examination for them also who are in hostels. So sir, like is this the case? Like if half of the people are cheating, then half of them who are here they also cheat. Sir, these are the things even in here. Like this is just one example. There are lots of examples. There are professors here who will say that okay, I am a good professor and I am going to give everybody an A grade, or I will not give a grade lesser than a B. I will not get. I will give only A minus, B minus. I'm not going to fail anybody. So why is it the case? Like if somebody is not reading and not performing well, why he should not fail? There are lots of examples here, and these are the things I face every day. Like
So
now the thing is that
let me just pause you for a second. So it sounds like there are many, and it's an unfortunate reality that there's lots of perhaps irrational thinking in the world, but not all irrational thinking has to do with this thinking for oneself versus following the herd, or free thinking versus bondage. So I'm not seeing the connection between what you're talking about and this what we were talking about. But maybe I'm missing something.
so what are you trying to say? I didn't understand.
Oh, I was asking. So my question that I opened to you guys was, when you think about yourselves or you think about the people around you, and they could be people at IIT, they could be your family, they could be your school friends, whatever. To what extent do you think they would fit the profile that sketches out of somebody who is a free thinker? Or to what extent do you think they would fit the profile of somebody who's, in some form of bondage? The various examples he gives. That was my question.
Sir, I will say like most people are not able to free think. Like I am also like we are following the herd mentality just, and whatever we think, like it is a very short range of things.
And you say this on the basis of your own experience and the people around you?
Yes, sir. As per I see, like most people are doing the same.
Okay. Arun, am I pronouncing that right, Arun?
Yes, sir, you're pronouncing that right.
Tell me.
Yeah, so at least as compared to people around me, I think I'm much of a free thinker.
Okay.
Means you say I'm currently living in my house. I'm not at the college. So it's like most of my neighbors are typical orthodox, I should say.
Okay. What's an example?
So it's like they won't accept changes in any of the customs, or they won't accept just change. They won't just accept changes. They are typically against any other religion also. So most of the time I usually ask myself, have any of the person from other religions I have met have ever done something wrong to me? Or or maximum times few of my seniors or teachers where I was before, they used to ask me that, see that successful person, be like him. So I used to ask myself that, what do I get from being like him? Can I be successful if I be like him? So I think I'm much of a free thinker.
Okay, great. So then,
And
I don't know if you'll
for
get
my
that much out of the
friends,
course. Yeah, go ahead.
and for my friends, yeah, I do think they are also free thinkers. I mean, we are pretty much similar.
Okay, great. So I hope you get things out of the course, but it sounds like at least the orientation part of it may be unnecessary. Okay, we have, and I'm going to close the queue after this. We have Hemant, Unnati, Shambhav, and Kartikeya.
So, sir, I think I consider myself as a free thinker because I don't blindly have any faith in anything. Like if I say my if I look that my around my surrounding people are really very superstitious. They believe in God blindly. They follow all the rituals which has no significance, like फूड, जैसे वो मृत्यु बाद होता है ना, वो खाने के बाद बनाया जाता है, मरने के बाद बनाया जाता है. So I think in villages all those things are happening. 12 to 13, 12 to 13, they are crying mourning of the death, and so I don't believe in those things. And in college, I think most of my friends are free thinker. They basically don't follow blindly anything.
Great. Well, this means that this course is not going to be that useful to you guys, or maybe if you already have the orientation, it'll give you some tools. But I hope you won't get bored in the process. Okay, Unnati.
I'm audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So I would say that I won't classify myself as a free thinker, but I do think that I have the orientation for one reason being that I generally want to get my entire knowledge about a topic. Let's say it's any topic, whether it be political, social, religion, or the things that parents say to us that you should do this because it said so and so, or you should not be doing this because it said so and so. So I actually need some reason, some logical reason backing it up before I want to follow it. Else, I would want to try and experiment it. In case I can experiment that thing, I would actually want to experiment it first myself, see the results, and then accept whatever the consequence comes, like whether that thinking is wrong or whether that thinking is right. And if it's something that is like a political view or something, I want to analyze it first, understand how it affects me, how it affects the society, how much wrong or right it is according to me, and then accept that. As for those people around me, well, my neighbors and my father, they are quite conservative. They and my father's side of family also, they're quite conservative. And as for my mother, I think she is willing to accept change, but then again, not that much flexible. Like, let's pick up the topic of LGBTQ plus. So I recently registered for that Indradhanu. The volunteership forms were open, and I registered for that. And my mom saw it, and she was like, "What is this? And are you interested like that?" And I was like, "No, I just have a general curiosity because I support them." So it was that thing. So like she accepts the change, but she is not herself willing to follow that ideology. And my younger sister is a free thinker as well. She is just like me. Like, she doesn't want to go like that without seeing the reason behind things. She doesn't accept it like that. So I guess that's it.
Okay, great. Shambhav.
Yeah, I actually had a question. Is regarding what does it exactly mean to be a rational agent, like and nature of rationality? Like, is it like just elaborate a bit on it, because this whole article, this whole book, it mentions rational a lot without ever defining it per se.
So it's a huge question. That's a very good question to ask about the nature of rationality. For our limited purposes right now, and we'll see this elaborated with examples as the course proceeds. it might be most useful to think of it just in contrast to the irrational. So if you believe things in the absence of evidence, or if you believe things against the evidence, that would count as irrational for somebody like Cohen. If you that's I guess in terms of overall orientations. There may be further questions about what is the rational thing to believe in some particular context. How should you compute the probabilities in some kind of case, or how should you study, for instance, in the case that we spoke about in the last class about with Shashank mentioned, what is the rational thing to think about with respect to the death penalty? There, the word rational might be contrasted with the kind of immediate emotional gut reaction, something of that sort. But it's a good thing to kind of keep your eye out on, that this term is being used a lot. But right now, it might be most helpful to just kind of keep that question on pause, and you see more and more examples of, in a way, the wrong kind of thinking, and that will, you'll see many examples of irrationality as we proceed in the course, and that will help fill out this inchoate notion right now of what counts as rational. Does that help at all?
Kind of, yes. I mean, I was thinking about like rationality in terms of I was thinking about truth, like as in is rationality, is it or is critical thinking a means of obtaining truth? And then it came to the fact that truth, is it objective? Is there a universal truth to it, or is truth based upon what you see? Based on that, you build a model, and that model has a truth to it. So in that context, I was thinking about it a bit more. It was quite a big mess. My head was in a muddle, but it is what it is.
Well, we'll see some of that. Part of being in a muddle is just that's what philosophy involves. I'm going to introduce you to a free thinker in my family, which is, like I said, one reason why I end up being late for class. You want to say hi to everyone? Okay. No, it's okay, you can do that. It's fine. So this is one of the limitations of working from home, is that one has these distractions. You okay? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there were a couple more people who wanted to speak, and then I do want to move on to other things I want to say about the issue. So Kartikeya and Amzad.
So regarding to say myself as a critical thinker, there are some sides of me that actually might be a lot open to other things. I mean, like I won't say I don't have any prejudices. I always there are always some preconceived notions about a topic, let's say, but I'm usually open to look at the other side of the fence. Uh, Means like if I am looking at something that I would like to hear or read about things that are likely say very opposite to what I am thinking. So
Okay.
I'm partly a critical thinker, but again, partly there are things that might actually be driven by prejudices in my case.
Okay. Amzad, and then Sanskar, and then we'll close.
Yeah, I want to say that everyone is not a free thinker. May I speak in Hindi, if you don't mind?
I don't mind.
Yeah, someone says that orthodoxy, like if you believe in something that तो आप जो है rational thinking नहीं करते. But if I say that I believe that the cow slaughter is wrong, like कि गाय को मारना is wrong thing, and I have the reason, and I can agree upon that, like कि अगर मैं तुमको उस पे agree करवा लेता हूँ, that वो मेरे लिए जो है फ्री थिंकिंग होगा कि I can give a reason और उससे मैं दूसरों को एग्री कर सकूं. And अदर जो मेरे सराउंडिंग्स में है, अगर लाइक
we lost you for some reason.
free thinker, right?
Okay, I mean, it's part of what you said. But fair enough. I think at least and in the conversation we've had so far, there has been this contrast between the conservative and the free thinker, the dogmatic and the free thinker. You won't be surprised to see, as we'll see a couple of weeks from now, that one of the big places where this debate has played out is in the context of religion. Very specifically the context of what some of you will be familiar with as the Enlightenment, questioning the received wisdom, let's say, of the Christian religion. We'll see that in the reading by Kant and another reading by actually a British mathematician called W.K. Clifford. Yeah, so that is one place. We see it again in conversations around science and superstition. Sanskar.
Yeah, good evening, sir. So basically, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when we say basically when a person is, let's say, doing free thinking or is a free thinker, so are we talking of the process here or are we talking of the result? So what I mean by that is case one is, let's say someone is served a statement and that person is thinking that whether this statement is right or, let's say, or wrong, or do I believe in this or not, and he is having some internal debates and discussions. Case one is this, and case two is that he is not, having any kind of basically he rejects all the universal truths which conservatives believe exist. So which of these definitions will be good for what is a free thinker? In the sense, are we result oriented or are we process oriented in what we mean by a free thinker? I mean, just like what Amjad sir said, what if a person is a free thinker and reaches that something like cow slaughter is actually wrong? What is that free thinking or not? Just want to have that question.
So good. I'm very glad that you and Amjad, and in another way, Shambhav, I think, have pointed to the same question. I'm going to see these as it's the same question. It's very, very important to see this as, in your terms, a process-based issue and not an outcome-based issue. So I at least conceive free thinking, critical thinking as very domain-neutral and quite non-ideological tools. So you could be in a context where, if you're so for instance, to take somebody I admire quite a lot, and some of you may have heard his name, others may not. You could be he's a journalist called Glenn Greenwald. He writes on US politics. He was the person who broke, I don't know if you've heard of this other person, Edward Snowden. And he broke the story about Edward Snowden. If you think about something like Glenn Greenwald, would identify kind of, as a political liberal, but a lot of the time he spends in his writing nowadays is just like fighting with other political liberals. And he thinks that many people adopt a certain kind of liberalism in again, in a default, unthinking, tribalistic kind of way. So I can easily imagine somebody who is a critical thinker, a critical thinker in an environment that's largely, in the political domain, let's say a liberal political domain, might end up being, more on the conservative side of things. And a critical thinker who's surrounded more by, in a kind of conservative ecosystem, might well end up being more on the liberal side of things. So that's, to me at least, I think very important that we see it as a process-oriented thing. Does that make sense? I mean, just to give you an example from my own life, and I think of myself as a critical thinker or hoping to aspiring critical thinker. And when I was doing this research on the death penalty, I mean, teaching this course, I came into the course thinking, hey, of course, death penalty should be abolished, and I just had to find these arguments, and then convince the students. And I actually left the course after teaching it some years, saying, look, I'm not so sure anymore whether I agree with whether the death penalty should be abolished. So, in a way, I was moving towards what might seem to be a more conservative kind of position. So yeah, so it's crucial for my purposes that we think of this as process oriented and not ideologically oriented, or put it this way, not necessarily ideologically oriented. There are some ideologies that will be inhospitable to critical thinking. Maybe fascism, or an ideology that says, the supreme leader is the person you have to follow. Don't ask questions. It's not going to get you anywhere, right? So if that's an ideology that you could see obviously at odds with critical thinking, but by and large, I think these tools that we're going to develop can be and should be used across different contexts. We'll see, for instance, in the case of science versus superstition, initially, at first pass, it might seem like obviously the critical thinker is going to be a believer in science, but some of the readings that we'll look at, so I'm just going to charge my laptop. Some of the readings we'll look at will actually make you perhaps question that that easy kind of hierarchy. Maybe it's not so easy to defend the superiority of science over superstition. Let me. So good. I'm glad that some of these issues have been brought up. Now, for some reason, my laptop is refusing to charge even though I've plugged it in. This is a problem. I don't want to record for posterity this business. I'm just going to switch off my video for a second and say रुकावट के लिए खेद है. One second. Okay, guys, I'm not sure why this is happening. If this laptop does run out, then I'll just take a moment and join from Teams. I'm sorry, and now I see a bit of shadow as well. I'll get this sorted out before our next class. Okay, let me move to one other aspect that's kind of continuous with what we've been talking about. I mentioned that we have an important limitation that we should keep in mind in discussing this course, and that limitation is that what we're talking about as virtues, as things that a course like critical thinking might introduce to you, is this orientation of openness to evidence, and then more specific tools for how to think about evidence, how to weigh evidence, etc. The limitation is that actually comes out in the connection between being a critical thinker as an individual and living in an open society, which is that many of the things one might need for critical thinking might not be things about that involve the individual. It might be things that we need from our surroundings, from our political institutions, from our economic institutions, and just getting these tools might not, in fact, for the big ticket kinds of issues, be all that helpful. So that's a pessimistic kind of conclusion. what do I have in mind? So sometimes I think about, I mean, since I'm now here in the Delhi winter, think about air pollution. You can give me I can be the fittest kind of person and do as much exercise as I should, but that's not going to make a difference to the big problem in um, uh, the big problem around me, the problem of air pollution. It may make some incremental difference to my particular life, but a much bigger problem, is going to be unsettled because of it. Or you might think, and simply move into this, the second piece, the piece by Kenneth Boyd. You might think about the case of fake news. There's a lot of stuff now we'll see. And last semester when I taught this course, I had somebody who's a fact checker, online fact checker, come and talk about that. I can give you the best online fact checking tools, and they might help you to navigate your way through the online space through fake news. But really, that doesn't do very much to address the causes of fake news, or the fact, those in a way are supply side issues that just having the critical thinking skills is not going to it's not really going to affect. So that's an important, or to give you a third example, which we'll talk about in the case of Noam Chomsky. If you want to be a critical thinker of this Elliot Cohen kind, and question the question your political leaders, question what you see on mass media, you need to have access. You need to have access to this information, and you need to have kind of the energy and the space to process it. But you might not, right? You might live in a society, a kind of where you come home from work, you're exhausted after a long day. You don't have the bandwidth to now use your, these critical thinking skills you have, acquired in this course in order to think about these big questions. You may be exhausted. You may just want to watch TV and watch, I don't know, a sports show, or some Netflix show, or play a game on your computer. At a mass level, if everyone's doing that, then that might not be very good from a from the perspective of whether one lives in a free society. But just the teaching of critical thinking skills is not going to fix that issue. So we'll see this in more detail in the context of Chomsky. But that's the caveat, that many of the problems which call forth the need for critical thinking can't actually be solved by the exercise of critical thinking skills themselves. That's the point I wanted to make. Let me turn then to very briefly the piece by Kenneth Boyd, which I'll now turn to. And here, the term that I just used, fake news, is introduced right up front. What is Boyd's point? So Boyd isn't really talking about freedom or democracy as essential values, but he's talking about the notion of well-being, how good things are for you. So we have a notion of physical health and what you can do to improve it, the kinds of things that reduce it. We have a notion of mental health, right? People can have, especially I think in the COVID context, in the IIT context, mental health issues we speak of, right? What do we have in mind when we speak of mental health issues? things like anxiety, depression, that's the kind of thing that come to mind. So Boyd wants to say, look, just as we speak of physical and mental health, we should also speak of epistemic health. Epistemic means connected with knowledge, and the his idea is framed here. Epistemic well-being. Well, why don't we have somebody read this passage? Hemant, you've read a couple of times, so I'll invite somebody else to read both this passage and the next. Actually, yeah, this passage to start with.
Epistemic well-being is a reasonably based sense that you will be able to know what you want and need to know about the world in order for a life to go well. This could involve knowledge in general. You want to feel like you can find answers to questions that you think are important to satisfy your curiosity, as well as knowing more specific things. There will be some things you need to know in order to accomplish your life's projects. If you have access to lots of good sources of information and can get your questions answered when you need them, then you have a high degree of epistemic well-being. If, on the other hand, you are surrounded by liars or just have no way of finding out what you need to know, you're not doing nearly as well.
Okay, just read the next paragraph and then we'll just chat for a bit. Go ahead, read this paragraph.
Okay. Components of epistemic well-being: access to truth, access to trustworthy sources of information, and opportunities to participate in productive dialogue.
Okay, so just pause there. So what's Boyd's idea? What I want you to see is it's a different kind of idea from what Cohen has in mind. Cohen is concerned with freedom and with things like democracy. Boyd is just saying, look, you know, sometimes for the things that we want in our lives, we need to have access to good sources of information, and the extent to which we have that is an index of our epistemic well-being. And if you have poor epistemic well-being, well, you can make the wrong choices, right? You might join IIT Delhi because everyone around you says it's the right thing to do, but find it's the wrong choice to have made. You might have to make a decision about what medication to give somebody who in your family who has COVID, and you might end up making the wrong choice. You might give a medicine that actually makes things worse rather than makes things better. So these are kind of practical decisions in life that have a whole range of goals, right? Practical decisions on which we have important outcomes in our life, where getting things wrong might have significant costs. And though he doesn't use the term critical thinking, these two aspects, the access to trustworthy sources of information and opportunities to participate in productive dialogue, at least those two, are quite connected with issues of critical thinking. Right? To tell whether a source of information is trustworthy or not might involve using skills of the kind that we'll develop in this course. And in order to have a productive dialogue, he talks about this third component of epistemic well-being, being able to engage in discussion, also has a connection with critical thinking, being able to ask the right questions. I think that when people sometimes say, well, what is philosophy about? If I teach an intro to philosophy course, in a way, you could think of this course also as an intro to philosophy course. One of the things that comes to mind to me is that, look, in a philosophy course, you may not get answers because these are questions that are quite complex and deep, but you'll get, hopefully at least, a a kind of heightened sensibility for asking the right kinds of questions. You might think, look, that's part of what you need to engage in productive dialogue. But anyways, that's another. You might have no interest in democracy or in freedom, but you may nevertheless have some interests which are purely, you could call them quote unquote selfish interests, that might make you want to, that might make at least some tools of critical thinking useful for you. Okay, so let me just pause there, step back. So I've just introduced these two different perspectives on the subject matter of the course. We've discussed in a bit more detail the Elliott Cohen piece. What we're going to do now in the next couple of weeks, at the lecture level, we're going to look at the domain of language and how being sensitive to the use and abuse of language is an important part of the critical thinker's toolkit. And we'll look at two domains in particular. Primarily, we'll look at the domain of propaganda, political propaganda, as I said in the case of Nazi Germany, but you can see it in many other countries at many points in time, including our own. So we'll look at that example. I'm hoping that we look at the example of advertising as well, and trying to get, as I think I mentioned, somebody I know who's worked in advertising for many years to come and talk to us. So that's what we'll do in the next couple of weeks in lectures. I'll post readings later tonight. And in the tutorials, we'll spend a couple of weeks, I think, exploring these attempts to elaborate the ideal of thinking for oneself. Not so much next week will be more of an intro. I'll assign this little piece by the speech by Dr. Ambedkar that I mentioned, but we'll really get going on the tutorials the following week. Okay, I see that we have a couple of minutes left, and also a couple of minutes left on the.
I have a question.
Sorry?
Sir, where can we find this book called Free Thinking by Paul Chapman?
I'll post the full book for you guys.
Sir.
Just send me an email to remind me, but that's what I would normally do, is post these things. So I just haven't had a chance to do it right now. I'll create a link on a folder on Piazza for like resources, and I can post stuff that maybe of interest to you.
I think so. You can email us as well, because it will be.
I'm going to keep my communication as far as possible through Piazza.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts?
Sir, what will be the timing of the tutorial? Like you said that two slots will be on Wednesday between 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, and the third slot about which you have to talk about.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'm just going to look at my schedule, which is also becoming a bit clear. I'll just post a few alternatives, and then we'll just do a poll and figure out what's most popular. And if there's anyone who can't make it, we'll work it out. Anyone who wants to attend tutorials will be able to attend them. Okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, guys, I'm going to sign
off. Just keep some alternatives as well, because Wednesday 1 to 3 may not be available for all.
Yeah.
But it's good if, let's say, a lot of people have the tutorial in the same time to have maybe good discussions, and also maybe keep some good alternatives. That's all.
Yeah. So I'll have at least 3 different slots.
Yep.
And if there's a substantial number of people who can't make those 3 different slots, then we'll revise the pattern. But I'm committed to just and I really enjoy tutorials, so it's not a burden for me. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, guys. See you then. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Monday.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir.